Humanity Matters.
Welcome back here to the Foghorn Humanity. I'm your host, Richard Acritelli. I'm here with Mark Drexler. We're going to get into the combat landings of his father, who was training with the armor in England and had maybe some different experiences that he was used to being a Brooklyn boy in the Western Theater of Operations, really kind of based out of England itself. When does your dad find out that he knows he's in an invasion of France, that they all have an idea of it? When does he start shipping out? Where does he ship out of to go across the channel to Normandy?
Well, and thank you again, Richard, for inviting me. It's a great honor and a privilege to be able to share some stories about my dad's courageous efforts that, as we had just discussed, a virtuous war to save humanity. It's nothing less than that. He shipped out in these large transport ships. The military used private shipping. So my understanding is the Queen Mary, which was a luxury liner, was filled, and you could find pictures of troops going back and forth.
Yeah.
So now he's in England, and they're going through maneuvers and training and honing their abilities. Their firing abilities and getting comfortable with the equipment that they have. I went into some detail about...
And the training's extremely serious, because as serious as it is in Texas, you're still within the continental United States. Now they're in Europe. They take a trip. You know, they could see certain parts of England. They could see France. Yeah,
they're there for a reason.
Yeah.
Now, because of the secrecy that was necessary, he didn't know exactly what beach or what coastline he was going to land. Nobody knew that. But he knew he was going somewhere. They weren't there for a vacation. And as the spring unfolds, the training kicks up. And as we discussed, some of the training became deadly, where there was friendly fire incidents and accidents. And once May comes around, the upper echelons of the American military had earmarked June 5th as the target date for D-Day.
Yep.
And so the troops were locked down, I believe, maybe a week prior to that, could be even longer. And once the first week of June comes in, they start marshaling. Everybody is marshaling. Every unit you can find,
getting their troops, resources,
the
everything
paratroopers,
ready.
the Air Force, they're starting to soften up the coastline, and they do not. The Americans don't want to tip their hand to Rommel. Rommel's a pretty smart dude.
Yeah.
So
you have German spies, German aircraft.
So they were bombarding the coast up and down, and not necessarily focusing on Normandy. But to some extent, they did, obviously. They had chosen Normandy a few months prior to that, in part because the Germans felt or thought that Calais would be the logical target because it's the closest.
And a lot of your father's counterparts were sitting in Calais, right, with the Panzers. And,
yeah.
You know, and that was a fatal mistake that Hitler...
And Rommel was building up that defensive wall along all of the coast, including the Normandy coast. So we have the first week in June. I can only imagine what's going through my father's mind right now. I guess he feels confident. I've been training for almost a year now. I'm good. I'm a good shot. I got medals, and
You know what the interesting thing is? Your dad's not even 21 yet. Today, he wouldn't be able to have a beer in a restaurant or a bar here in Glen Cove or in the city.
Yeah.
And he's got a tremendous amount of responsibility. He's probably up to sergeant by now.
Yes.
You know, he's a member of a tank crew. He's doing a lot of training. There's a lot on his shoulders.
Yes. I think the mindset of the World War II soldier, and you could see that in Saving Private Ryan. You could see it in Band of Brothers, which I encourage your audience to try and try and view, because that's based on real characters who were in this European theater of operation. They're confident. They know they're fighting for a purpose. They've seen the monsters that they're fighting. And I got to believe, like you pointed out, a competitive experience. When you walk onto the field or a court, you don't believe that you're going to be defeated. You always have the confidence that you're going to defeat your opponent. Yeah. And in this case, my father probably felt he was going to defeat his opponent. Now, that could be very naive, which it was.
You know what the big thing is? He's looking around. He's looking at airborne. He's looking at additional armor. He's looking at more infantry. He's looking at supplies from Coca-Cola to, shells of every kind, right? It gets to a point where now this is a logical progression of the war, is to get into France and to push forward, right?
Now, it could be a false sense of strength, but he's sitting with a full battalion of tanks. He hasn't seen a Panzer or a Tiger up close, and if you haven't seen that and you're standing next to a Sherman, that's still a pretty big piece of material. So he's very confident. He's comfortable with the people that are in his tank, because your life is relying on these people. They're working as a team. So they start marshaling the troops, and what they did was, and I have photographs, and your audience can find on YouTube.
Sure.
These large tanks have to be loaded onto these enormous landing craft, much larger than the individual infantry troops' landing craft. They're backing up the tanks into the hull of these ships. And they're starting to pull out now from every port in England. They're starting to pull out. And now it's June 4th, and they're starting to pull out, and there's a big problem.
Yeah, the weather.
Eisenhower has been notified that the weather for June 5th landing is not acceptable for a landing. There's a storm, there's rough seas, the channel is a terrible place in the best of times. So Eisenhower chooses to delay. Now, that turned out to be somewhat of a blessing in disguise, because we know that Rommel is looking at the same weather forecast and the same weather.
And he goes home with a pair of shoes and sees his wife with Lucy, right?
It was his wife's birthday. So he goes home. He says, everything's under control here. These guys are not. And they're going to land in Calais anyway. I'm not worried about Normandy.
And they didn't really think much of Eisenhower. They thought a lot of Patton, but not necessarily Eisenhower.
That's right.
They thought Eisenhower would be too cautious.
Right. And as you know, they used Patton as a decoy.
With Operation Fortitude,
he was a commander of a fake army.
The first army, fictitious, right?
The first army. So now that the landing craft are pulling out, and the water is churning, and now the soldiers, both the infantry, his battalion was attached, 1st Infantry Division, 29th Infantry Regiment. The boats are rocking and rolling, and his reports to me was everybody's heads over the side, barfing their guts up. They were so miserable, they couldn't wait to land.
Yeah.
Whether it be on a landing vessel having large amounts of tanks and half tracks, or you're in the actual landing craft. And we see it in Saving Private Ryan. They're barfing over the side. Now, my father, I don't know if this is true. My father said he wasn't really very seasick. He said, yeah, he was eating and he was very, I don't know if that's very accurate, but...
you don't know. People are different. Their nerves are different.
Yeah. But he appeared to be comfortable where he was. He's on a open air landing craft with his platoon of tanks, and they're waiting to go. Now, let me step back a moment. The first tanks to be landing on the beaches was the 741st Tank Battalion. They had a company. Now, my father's battalion was earmarked for Omaha Beach. For your audience information, the beaches were not only codenamed, but they broke up the beaches into smaller areas. So my father constantly remembered and used the term, because I would ask him, where did you land? He said, Omaha Beach, easy red. And the famous expression for the veterans who landed on that beach, he said, easy red, it was red with blood, but it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
And what he did not know was all the pre-bombardment and the softening up was not directed at Omaha Beach. It was, to my information, was the only beach that did not get artillery or Air Force bombardment. Every emplacement the Germans had, the 88s and their machine guns were right there. So there
was a point during the Omaha landings that Bradley almost had to decide, do we pull back?
Yeah, they were going to abandon it. Yeah. Interesting, there were some famous officers on that beach. Teddy Roosevelt Jr.
Yeah.
Was on that beach. He was the only general on
terrible arthritis. He said, we're going to start the war right here.
Yeah. He was on the beach. Right? There was a famous lieutenant colonel. I showed you a book.
Roosevelt ends up having a massive heart attack, 4 or 5 weeks later or something like that in his tent.
For your audience purposes, the title, The Dead and Those About to Die, a lieutenant colonel yelled at his troops to get off the beach, and the author used that quote, the only people on the beach are those who are dead and those about to die.
Yeah, you have no future on this beach.
No. So the 741st is tasked to be the first one in. Now, the planners of this invasion knew they needed armor on the beach. And what they did was some of the units were what they called rubberized. So they put rubber around the turret, and then they put a snorkel of sorts above the engine, which was in the rear, so that the water would not get into the engine compartment. Now, June 6th comes about. I'm sure my dad hears the tumult and the noise, the bombardment of the ships now. This is prior to the sun coming up. The paratroopers already are in the air, and they're starting to land. So Eisenhower gave the okay, and his famous, I think his famous quote was, let's go.
Yeah. How long can you dangle this operation?
Yeah, we can't keep them sitting on these boats. And now my dad's troop ship starts to pull out. And what the audience needs to understand is you are on radio silence. He is hearing and seeing what's going on the beach, but there's no radio feedback. Radio silence, you don't know what's going on, you're only hearing. And I'm sure he's standing outside his tank watching what's going on, because he knew his particular company was not going to be going on. As I had shown you, and maybe at a later date, I have the actual landing plans of the invasion, and it's clear where his battalion was going to embark.
The amazing thing is, and you spoke about the beach, at Omaha and how they had broken up, is how to the literal point. This group was here, group was here, and then the vessels that are coming from England, and they're all going to different spots.
Yeah.
I mean, the organization is immense.
And what the audience has to know, that for obvious reasons, the Germans had every landing spot zeroed in for months. And Easy Red was not prepared from the American standpoint, and every gun emplacement was still in place. Now, on these beaches, you needed to get off the beach as soon as you could. For your audience information, Churchill lost a battle in World War I called Gallipoli.
Yeah, it was a
they were
disaster.
stuck on the beaches. So this was imperative that they get the men off the beach, and they knew there were two exits or egress lines on Easy Red, and that was covered. So the first units, I believe it was the 29th Infantry, land on the beach on Easy Red, and they're getting chewed up. They're calling for the armor, and the 741st pulls out of these troop ships and immediately sinks.
Wow.
Because the rubberized waterproofing didn't work, the snorkels didn't work. So you were looking for approximately 15 tanks to come on initially for support, and 3 make it on, and they're immediately blown up. So now those soldiers, as you have pointed out, Omaha Beach was in desperate shape at this point, very, very early on. And the infantry was getting decimated, and the fear was there's going to be an immediate counterattack with German armor. As it turned out, lucky for the Americans,
Hitler was sleeping.
well, Hitler was sleeping, and he had the Panzers in reserve.
And they couldn't do anything without his authority.
Right. And the reason for that is he was paranoid that his military was working against him.
Which it was. About 6 weeks later, they tried to kill him, right?
Yeah.
The Wolf Slayer.
Yeah. So because the first elements were destroyed, and Bradley and the other commanders saw that they're going to lose the beach, and they're going to lose more men, we need to get another armored unit. The second company, B Company, of my father's battalion was then called in. So my father's battalion, elements of my father's battalion, were the 2nd Tank Battalion onto the beach that engaged the enemy. The first ones didn't engage anybody. They were just either drowned or they were destroyed. It was lucky for my father, and I would laugh about this with my brother. It was a lucky thing that my father's tank was not rubberized and wasn't sent in with those snorkels, because he couldn't swim. So, and I have seen videos of tank crewmen getting up through the hatch and jumping into the water. So it was lucky for him that didn't happen to him.
Now, was there a hole created in order for your father's tank to get off the beach and kind of get, to move inland?
Well, so now we get into the actual detail of
like the engineers and stuff
of
like
my
that.
father. Well, there were supposed to be, and the tank traps,
Yeah.
and no. The short answer is no. And my father was very, very clear about his earliest action. This is his first action. So let me just say this, and I've read this about other soldiers in action, especially for the first time. He said, after all that training, he was so scared that his knees were shaking all night.
Yeah.
All night. He was so scared that as they're pulling up to land the tanks, they're now in the tanks because combat is going on, bombardment's going on.
All hell is
ships
broken
are,
loose,
getting blown up. He's in his turret, and he's just firing shell after shell. And he's very clear about this. He had no idea where he was firing, what he was firing on. He just wanted to keep on firing. In for one particular reason, which he was clear about, they wanted to make the Germans think there were more of them than there really actually was. Yeah. The other thing he was very clear about, which is sad, is that they had to roll very carefully onto the beach because there were so many dead on Omaha, and the medics and the graves registration didn't recover anybody at that point. You had bodies on the beach and you had bodies floating.
It's completely chaotic.
It was terrible. This beach was terrible, as opposed to Sword and Juneau. That had those were the English beaches that had less of an issue.
The beach that your dad's on, is that on the northern side of Omaha Beach, or is it on the southern side?
It's toward the southern side.
On the southern side there. Wow.
And remember, the German gun emplacements are in place. They've not been destroyed. The soldiers are now completely exposed, or they're up against a seawall, and they're anticipating a counterattack, the German armor coming down. And there's only 2 egress sections coming out. And so B Company gets onto the beach, and they're providing cover and some firepower for the soldiers. My father's and the rest of the company is moving on closer to the beach, and they're firing.
Wow.
He rolls onto the beach, but they have to go as slow as they can under the circumstances, because they were unaware of which soldiers were alive or which were dead. They did not want to run over their own soldiers.
When does your dad and the armor finally make it off the beaches and inland? It's got to be on the first day, right?
Well, it is on the first. Well,
later on,
June
in the first
7th, he comes on, even though he's credited with amphibious landing, which he did
on Normandy.
The fighting is desperate. As you pointed out, they almost called off the landing on Omaha, but they struggled. Both the infantry and the armor, Company B gave them enough cover where they began to attack the emplacements, and they began to make progress up
against
onto
the
the
German
beach.
Resistance.
Yeah. So around June 7th, they had their first goal, I believe, from the after action report, was the village of Mons, Mons, and they needed to make their way up through that area, through the beach area, and into these villages.
And that's something that's important, right? Is that every unit had what they needed to do on this day, the following day, and so on. So they all had expectations, not only at Normandy, but as they moved inland, where they were supposed to head to.
Yeah. And so they started moving up against units. And as I had told you, I have the after action reports, which maybe at some point in the future, some of the actual details we can get into. As I had told you, my father's battalion and my father were in the major battles of the European theater.
Sure. Now, when you come back, right, hopefully we'll have you back in the next maybe week or so, and we'll go over all the stuff from the beach inland. We'll talk about his fighting operations in France, across France. A great picture of your uncle at the Eiffel Tower,
yes,
right?
Yes.
And really your family history of 3 boys that, answered the call of service, and, seeing anti-Semitism in Texas and probably in other spots as well, and within the United States and in service.
And your audience knows that we're broadcasting from a Holocaust center, and the American troops did liberate 2 concentration camps. Yeah. So that's another important factor.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. But Mark, thank you very much for coming down.
You're
here
welcome.
Today.
It's my pleasure.
Look at all this wealth of information that Mark has on the table here. You can see a little bit of the teacher in him, the instructor, and definitely his attention to detail when it came to not only the importance of his family story, but to a lot of the stories of other families as well that answered a call to fight here for the United States from Pearl Harbor all the way until the end of World War II. I'm your host, Richard Acritelli, here on the Fog of War and Humanity on HMTV. Thanks for sharing part of your moment with us today.
If you enjoyed exploring the information, history, and stories in today's conversation, be sure to check out our other podcasts here on HMTV. Please subscribe, share, and stay connected for more engaging conversations.
Humanity Man.